Welcome into Bayou Bengals football with Brant Parshall, where we talk straight LSU football. So let's get into it. So the key thing for LSU football this year is going to be the play of Mason Smith up front. Mason Smith, one of the top defensive tackles, not only in the SEC but in the entire country, and he's going to play a big role in helping LSU be a stout team up front. So yeah, Mason Smith's going to be big for LSU. Brian Kelly did a really good job working the transfer portal. Deuce Chestnut is a guy they bring in from Syracuse. He's played well the last couple seasons at Syracuse. Also bring in a safety from Tulane. So yeah, LSU. I think the big question mark is can Jayden Daniels lead this team to an SEC title and to a national title? If you look at LSU, the years. Let's look at the years they've won it all. So. 2019, they had a really elite quarterback play from Joe Burrow. But then in 2007, not necessarily elite quarterback play. To me, Jayden Daniels, he's good enough to win games, but still is leaving the question mark, can he win an SEC championship? Can he win a national championship? Jayden Daniels is not really a great thrower of the football. He is a dynamic runner. He's got really good acceleration. He can take off, make multiple guys miss. But yeah, Jayden Daniels, his play is going to be critical to LSU. And, LSU really has the ingredients of a national championship caliber team. Brian Kelly is a coach who's had success at multiple schools now, is a guy that can get to the national championship, has yet to win a national title, but you saw a couple times was right there with Notre Dame. So you got the coach, you got bookend tackles. Will Campbell's an excellent tackle. He's a guy that could be a top 5 pick in the 2025 NFL draft. You saw him make an impact as a freshman. They bring in Zaylen Hurd, a big-time recruit, number 15th overall recruit. If he is that talented, maybe they do move him to guard. So, yeah, with all the talent they have on the offensive line, so you have talent in the trenches. You got a coach that's been there. You got an experienced quarterback. All really positives as far as winning a national title is concerned. So, yeah, LSU, that I forgot they trailed in some games this year, and then even in the Georgia loss, the SEC title, they were competitive in that game. They really had Brian Kelly, I don't think really expected to win that game, even though he'll never say that as a coach. As a coach, you never want to make a statement like that. But the way he said, we're gonna throw a lot of things at him. We're gonna give it our all. It's kind of in a way saying that they, were a little bit of the underdog and didn't necessarily expect to go out to win. But yeah, Brian Kelly's done a really good job of bringing in depth on this team. They were lacking depth a little bit last year, and speaking of that Georgia game, that's where their depth showed in the defensive line. And to me, last year they had more of hustle guys. Ali Gay and B.J. Ojulari were pretty solid college players, but they're not true difference makers. Ojulari, I think, might have a nice NFL career, but I don't think he'll ever be an impact guy in the National Football League. Even though he had a lot of the traits that you wanted in an edge rusher, with length, competitive toughness, a guy with a high motor. But yeah, he was not consistently getting after the quarterback. I think Mason Smith has versatility, not only to play inside, but he can move. They can move him to the outside in a true 4 or 5 technique. So yeah, he is so crucial. You saw he got hurt in week 1 against Florida State. So if he can go out and ball out and be a presence on the inside, you got Mekhi Wingo's another defensive tackle that's a pretty solid player too. So can those guys disrupt and create havoc in the middle? You bring in Omar Spates, a transfer from Oregon State, a linebacker who has played really well throughout his career at Oregon State. I don't think he's got high-end movement skills, but he's a guy that he makes the most of his skill set. And what I mean by that is he reads plays very well. He does a good job of sitting in zone coverage, reading the quarterback. So he's got a good football IQ, and he's got, from the neck up, he is a really strong football player. Not the most physical of specimen, but I think he'll be a rock solid linebacker. So to me, I think Brian Kelly's thinking is you got Harold Perkins, who's just an alien, you guy that you can move all over the place, rush off the edge, play off, have him go off the ball in the middle, run sideline to sideline. You got Harold Perkins. You got Mason Smith. You got guys in the front seven, they're going to be disruptors. Let's go create depth. Let's get a little more depth at linebacker, and then let's create depth in the secondary. You haven't really hit on guys in the secondary, and that's what a lot of people are talking about. Who would have thought LSU would come into a season where their main question mark is cornerback? But to me, Brian Kelly's thinking was, we're not going to solve all. We still have not hit on a high-end level talent at corner or safety. Let's bring in some guys that are solid players that are good for depth, and we'll let Mason Smith, Harold Perkins, and maybe Omar Spates be the impact guys, but especially Mason Smith and Harold Perkins. We'll let those be the impact guys, but let's create depth in the secondary, so in case we run into injuries, we're going to be okay. So yeah, that's, to me, if they had injuries in to me, without the guys they added in the transfer portal, they might have been okay, but later in the season, I think the depth would really show. They landed Denver Harris, a guy that was a pretty high recruit from Texas A&M, so that was a nice move. Mason Taylor is a really good tight end they have. Mason Taylor, that's a big question mark. How high is his ceiling? Can Mason Taylor be a superstar tight end? Is he? He's not Brock Bowers level talent, but can he be like a true impact guy that his skill set translates well to the national to the NFL level, and he's just a guy that can become a go-to target and is effective after the catch. So, yeah, Mason Taylor, certainly a guy to watch. I think LSU has pretty good depth at running back. Noah Kane, 27 Williams, Armani Goodwin, number 22. He's a pretty nice player. So, depth at running back, LSU always has pretty good depth at running back. The receiver core, Malik Neighbors. I'm a big fan of Malik Neighbors. I think he's an outstanding wide receiver. It's a guy that's sitting a little bit lower on the consensus wide receiver rankings for the 2024 NFL draft, but I think he's a guy that's going to rise as the season moves on and people see what this guy can do. Obviously, we've seen a little bit of it in just his short LSU career, but Neighbors is a guy, he's a slot receiver that knows how to get open. I like his ability to adjust the ball. He's got good body control. You see what he can do after the catch. You see him compete against top-level corners like Kool-Aid McKinstry. So, yeah, LSU should be pretty solid at wide receiver. But, yeah, I mean, offense other than, Will Campbell, difference maker, Mason Taylor, potential to be a difference maker, and Malik Neighbors, you're kind of searching a little bit for more difference makers on the offensive side of the ball, I think. But, if you want to win a national championship, I think having bookend tackles is a really good start, and that's what LSU has. And then they do have experience on the interior offensive line as well. So yeah, and then the other question is, do we see Garrett Nussmeier at all this year? If Jaden Daniels struggles, does Nussmeier come in? And if he does come in, does he offer a high upside? So that's something to keep in mind for LSU. Do we see Nussmeier, and if so, how much of an impact does he make? But yeah, LSU, the schedule last year was pretty tough. This year they're going to open with Florida State. I cannot wait for that game. How does LSU handle Jared Verse? Once again, Jared Verse was pretty dominant and disruptive last year in that game. You saw he blocked the extra point that ended up winning that game. So that's going to be a big game going against Florida State. So yeah, LSU. If you followed my other channel, the Brant Partial Show, you know that I'm high on LSU. I'm a believer of LSU. Like I just named, I think they got the ingredients to win a national title. Whether they do or not, certainly is a question mark. But Brian Kelly, that had to have been such a relief beating Nick Saban in year one for Brian Kelly, because they really. I don't think a lot of people gave them a chance in that game, even though at the time it was like, if someone said before that game, if LSU wins, I don't think it would be a huge shocker. It was just one game where you thought you saw that Bama had already lost a game and you figured they would not lose again. And they do lose on that 2-point conversion that Mason Taylor gets. So yeah, that really put a stamp. That's really putting college football in the SEC, or Brian Kelly put a stamp and put the SEC in college football on notice that this is that he certainly can coach, and he's here to make he made an impact year one, and things are trending in the right direction year two, even though they did have they lost to Georgia in the SEC title, and then they had the heartbreaking loss to Texas A&M in the last game of the regular season that really cost LSU a chance. They still lost to Georgia, but that loss at A&M was really tough at the time, because if they would have defeated Georgia in the SEC title with that win, they would have still got a shot at the playoff. So let's shift gears to the LSU schedule. So they're going to go at Mississippi State in week 3, Arkansas at home September 23rd, at Ole Miss September 30th, and then at Alabama November 4th. Boy, would Brian Kelly like to beat Alabama again. And then home versus A&M November 25th, and then home versus Florida November 11th. So yeah, pretty tough schedule for LSU. You got to believe the SEC is a grind, man. I tell you what, I didn't realize how many games LSU trailed in some games last year. They trailed 14-0 in the Auburn game, They're down 14-3 in the Ole Miss game. LSU had a lot of things go their way. That's why, I guess, if you were to make a case for them not to win the SEC or win the national title this year, it's because a lot of games went against them. So there's that's one of those things where one year you got things kind of go your way. Sometimes the next year you're not as fortunate. Those breaks kind of don't go your way. So like the Ole Miss and the Auburn game, close games, even the Arkansas game, like that's easily, 2 of those games could have went their way, and then you're talking about LSU, a 7-8 win team, and it's a little different story heading into this year. Brian Kelly's not getting as much praise, and in there maybe there would have been a little bit of some rumblings, not for his job, but maybe if he's the right fit, as if he would have won 7 or 8 games, but. I think the bar was set lower, but Brian Kelly even admits the bar is set really high right now. So, and that's part of the animal of coaching in the SEC. He knew what he was getting himself into. He's been in this business a long time. I'm from the state of Michigan, so coached at Grand Valley, Central Michigan. So he's been he started off right in my backyard here, obviously where I was once at the school I attended, Central. So, yeah, Brian Kelly. He's no stranger to expectations. He's no stranger to experience. He's been coaching for a long time. He enters his second year. So talk some of the LSU coaches. Frank Wilson, their assistant head coach and running backs coach. Wilson was the running backs coach from 2010 to 2015, so he has a track record of coaching running backs. Their assistants do have a track record of coaching pretty well. Matt House, the defensive coordinator, was the linebackers coach of the Kansas City Chiefs. I thought Brian Kelly's he's done a pretty good job of getting assistants over the years, but he's a guy that's not afraid to move on from assistants. Maybe not always quickly, but he will make changes. You saw at Notre Dame, things were kind of not really going well. They had that one year where I think they went like 4-8, and they kind of clean house and moved on from a new assistants. But yeah, Brian Kelly, he knows how to evaluate talent, and he knows how to get assistant coaches. To me, that is what all the successful coaches have, and Brian Kelly certainly has that. He knows how to evaluate coaches, and he knows how to evaluate players. If you can do those two things, you can have success just on that alone. And they're actually just those 3 things. If you can recruit, evaluate coaches, and evaluate high school players, and now with the transfer portal play, if you can do those 3 things, despite what you could do X's and O's, and despite what you can do leadership, you might have a chance to be successful just doing those 3 phases. So yeah, and then Matt Denbrock, the OC, him and Brian Kelly go way back to Grand Valley. Denbrock's got quite the track record. And House, their defensive coordinator, was at Pittsburgh. He was one of the defensive assistants that was there when Aaron Donald was there. So he kind of gets a little bit of credit for saying he can coach he coached Aaron Donald. But yeah, so let's talk the LSU wide receiving core. It all starts with Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors, I'm a huge fan, like I discussed earlier, big fan of Malik Neighbors. I think Malik Neighbors is going to shoot up draft boards. Certainly one of the top wide receivers in the 2024 NFL draft. I think his skill set, he has all the traits you look for in a receiver: body control, ability to adjust to catches, can make contested catches, can shine against top corners. You saw what he did against Kool-Aid McKinstry in that game. So yeah. Lot of high level traits from Malik Neighbors. Also got Kyron Lacey. Lacey's a transfer from Louisiana. He's been kind of consistently adequate as far as statistic wise, but Lacey maybe is this year where could he have a 400, 500 year season where this is kind of like his ceiling where he makes, maybe has some big plays and maybe you kind of maximize his skill set. Another guy, Brian Thomas, kind of similar guy. Brian Thomas, just a just a solid receiver. I think Thomas has a little more upside. I think Brian Thomas should be the number 2 this year with Joreh Jenkins moving on. Brian Thomas is a guy that, can work the underneath route, knows how to get open, does have a little shake and bake after the catch, can make guys miss. He's not like elite at it, but certainly can do it. I think he has good hands, looks the ball all the way in. He's a natural hands catcher. So yeah, I like Brian Thomas's skill set. Thomas is not a game-changing wide receiver, but he's a good, solid receiver. He reminds me of a lot of wide receivers that LSU's had in the past. Some of them were good college players, didn't really translate to the NFL. Ruben Randall always comes to mind. Ruben Randall was a really good college player. Obviously, it didn't really work out in the NFL, but to me, I kind of get vibes of Ruben Randall from Brian Thomas, just a good, solid college receiver, maybe not an NFL future, but, a guy that he knows his role in this offense, underneath routes, knows how to get open on the out-breaking routes, and, once in a while can make a few guys miss and have a big play touchdown. But for him to consistently be the go-to guy, I think you're asking too much from Brian Thomas, but a solid player nonetheless. And then at tight end, and then, we'll talk some more depth at the wide receiver. So they bring in Aaron Anderson, a transfer from Alabama. Anderson was a former 5-star recruit, just didn't really work out at Alabama. So hoping you can get some high-end level play from him. And yeah, so now we'll and then another Chris Hilton Jr. is another guy that played a little bit. Landon Ibieta. And then at tight end, it all starts with Mason Taylor. I think the big question mark you're asking yourself if you're LSU, can Mason Taylor be a superstar for us? I think it's safe to say he is a star, the son of Jason Taylor. I didn't realize he was Jason Taylor's son. It's kind of surprising he didn't go to Alabama being Jason Taylor's son. But, yeah, Mason Taylor I think has the potential to be a superstar. Is he Brock Bowers level a tight end, but I guess that's like a touchdown. I guess that's not really a fair comparison, but Mason Taylor should be a star, and I think he does have an NFL future. Does this year, you saw him become a star as a freshman, does he take another step this year, or is that kind of what we saw last year, is that kind of who Mason Taylor are, just a star player, but not really like not necessarily a freakish, game-changing type of guy, but a really good player. That'll be interesting. But yeah, Mac Markway is another tight end they have on their depth chart. Giovanni Peterson. Peterson only appeared in 3 games last year, but Markway, yeah, I watched his tape from high school. This is a guy that is very aggressive as a blocker. So LSU's coaching staff is going to like this guy. I'm excited to watch him. So they needed some depth at tight end. They recruited a couple guys. Kamaran Pimpton's another guy. Jackson McGowan. So they've kind of filled out some depth at tight end, but they need some more proven guys other than Mason Taylor. But yeah, I mean, it's overall, if you were to just to give the wide receiver core and the tight end core a grade, it's you give it a good grade overall. So, but I mean, is this core unit as strong as how does it compare to some of the past LSU wide receiver tight end units? I mean, it's probably right there overall when you combine it, but do you wish, depth wise there was some more? Like, LSU once upon a time had Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham. And then they had Terrence Tolliver, Ruben Randall. So, yeah, I mean, you got Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, but you wish there wasn't so much of a drop off after, after Neighbors and then even after Brian Thomas. But so Kyron, yeah, I think that's a big question mark. Kyron Lacy. Can Kyron Lacy be a strong number 3 or even kind of like the even number 2 with Brian Thomas? I think is a big question mark. So, yeah. Let's talk for LSU. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to discuss with LSU. We'll talk the defensive line again. Mekhi Wingo. Brian Kelly had high praise for Mekhi Wingo. I think Mekhi Wingo's big because, Mason Smith is going to be the guy on the defensive line. But can Mekhi Wingo, just like Brian Thomas, and I touched on Brian Thomas being the number 2 and Kyron Lacy being the number 3, can Mekhi Wingo be like that next strong, anchor in the defensive line that's like a nice compliment to Mason Smith? I think that's the big question mark for LSU. And Omar Spates, the line, like we'll discuss him again. Can Omar Spates be a really good college player? I don't think he has. He has enough, good traits to be an NFL linebacker, but Brian Kelly sees something in him, and I see what he sees in him. This is a guy that he is has a very high football intelligence. So yeah, can Omar Spates be good? The secondary, it's crazy. Other people discuss. It's crazy that LSU's going to a season where they have question marks at corner and running back. But when I watch the running backs, I'm not as concerned. I think number 22 is a good player. Josh Williams, even though I don't think he has an upside, I like the way he runs. I think he's got good competitive toughness. I think he runs hard. He can break multiple tackles on a given play, and you do see some explosiveness in Josh Williams' game. John Emery Jr. too. LSU offense all around pretty strong, or the running back position, is pretty strong overall. But the days where it's not the Leonard Fournette, Darius Geis type of thing they got going on there. So that leads me to some of the burning questions I have for LSU football. I would say, what if LSU doesn't win 10 games this year? What if they win 8 or 9 games this year? Is that a huge disappointment? It goes back to what I touched on earlier. Did Brian Kelly set the bar too high in year one that 10 games, is going to be the gold standard? If winning less than that, is that a disappointment for LSU fans? And then, can they beat Alabama in back-to-back years? A huge question mark. Obviously, this is something that doesn't happen very often, beating Nick Saban once. If you're a head coach, if you beat Nick Saban once, that's usually a pretty big accomplishment. Can they do it twice? And then what if they lose to Florida State in back-to-back years? You do not want to start in a hole in back-to-back losing. You don't want to lose the whole or the season opener ever, but back-to-back years, digging yourself into a hole. I mean, look at the modern era of college football. You just don't see. No 2-loss team has made the college football playoffs. So if you start the season with 1 loss, then you can't really play as loose because you can't afford another loss. Look at this year, the Texas A&M loss really came back to bite them. So, that would give LSU had a chance to make it with 2 losses this year. The third loss really eliminated them. Does one of the transfers shine this year? So Deuce Chestnut, Denver Harris, the edge rusher from Texas, Swanson from Oregon. Does one of those guys? I don't think any of them would be a superstar, but one of those guys shine and make an impact. And the other thing, can LSU beat Georgia? Georgia, they were competitive last year with Georgia, but can they beat them? It's one thing to be competitive with a team, but can you beat them? I'd say this. I think if you can be competitive, you can beat them. So I think they could beat Georgia. Will they beat Georgia is the question mark if they meet that, or if they do play them in the SEC championship. But it's likely that's who they would meet. Obviously, it could be, maybe it is Tennessee, but Georgia the likely opponent in the SEC championship. And not only can they compete, but they should have the expectation that they want to beat them. Emory Jones and Will Campbell, really nice seasons as freshmen at offensive tackle. Can they take another step in their development? Can they have another really good season? So the Florida State, let's dive into the Florida State matchup. So the Vegas Insider, FanDuel has it set at -2.5, or LSU -2.5, LSU -3 on BetMGM. That's about what I would have it at. I think LSU does win this game. I think they do probably win by 3 or 4 points. I think it is a close game. I think you see a lot of stars really shining. I think this is a game where a lot of people will remember, and it's a college football game that people need. People are dying for matchups like this. So, yeah, I think what's going to be exciting about this game is going to be the LSU offensive line versus Jared Verse. I think what else is going to be exciting is Malik Neighbors versus the Florida State secondary, the LSU defense versus the Florida State run game, and Trey Benson. Trey Benson, one of the better running backs in all of college football. Mason Smith versus the Florida State offensive line. I think all those are going to be really fun matchups to watch in this game. Yeah, Mason Smith got injured early, but the type of player Mason Smith is, he could have had a performance similar to what Jared Verse had for Florida State. Mason Smith could have been that dominant in that game if he did not get injured. But yeah, I think I'm going to take LSU to win this game. I think they make a statement. I like what Brian Kelly said about this game. He said this is a big game, but if we lose this game, it's not. It is just only one loss. It's still a long season ahead, but I'm a believer in starting hot. Obviously, how you finish is the most important thing. Or obviously, how you finish is more important. But getting off to a hot start is big in college football. And you've seen, look at LSU in 2011. They beat Oregon in that opening game, and that kind of I think that. Does LSU, I mean, maybe if they lost that game, they probably still get to the national title, but I think that really kickstarted a belief. Look at LSU in 2019, that week 2 win against Texas. That's when you knew LSU was legit. I think, this win against Florida State, kind of like in LSU in 2019 and then LSU in 2011. I think those early season wins really, LSU put college football on notice, saying that we got something special brewing. So a big a blowout win over Florida State, or just a convincing win, I think would really put a stamp down for LSU that they are they could be headed on a path for a national, towards a SEC championship and for a playoff berth. So yeah, the 2011, 2019, those were 2019 when LSU won that game against Texas, that's when you knew they really were legit. But yeah, the Florida State game, LSU got Georgia State. They do have some games they should win against Army. So they really, the SEC will really, not just LSU, will take advantage of those games, and they'll certainly win those games. But yeah, I'm going to wrap with that. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Bayou Bengals football, straight LSU football talk. Until next time, peace.